Along with my day job running an investment business, I started Tinsley Park Talks, a global networking and leadership platform where I interview industry legends from finance to tech and great thinkers to notable celebrities. In these interviews, we discuss great ideas around investing, entrepreneurship, problem solving, and all other lessons of life. Welcome to another episode of Tinsley Park Talks. This program is in partnership with Crow. For more information, please click on the link below. Carla Harris became a household name in the world of finance, not only for her success at the job, but for being one of the very few African American women that rose to the highest ranks on Wall Street. Today, in addition to being a senior executive at Morgan Stanley, where she spent the last 3 decades, she's also well known for her motivational speeches at universities, global business conferences, and her appearances on media outlets like CNBC, Wall Street Journal, CNN, where she uses her voice and experience to positively influence young leaders around the world. In this episode, we discussed her upbringing in Texas and Florida, gospel singing from an early age, and factors that led her to Harvard for both her undergrad and MBA. She also shared with me her lessons as an investment banker and her role as chair at the National Women's Business Council under President Obama's appointment. And finally, we discussed her most recent book, Lead to Win, which I recently read, and it surely is helping my own journey as a leader. And I believe that it will also be true for you. Carla also sang a few lines from her latest release, Everybody is Somebody's Child. So make sure you tune in to listen at the end of the interview. Carla Harris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
It's such a pleasure. I've known about you for a long time. Obviously, you're on TV and corporate events throughout the country, and you've had an amazing career on Wall Street, and now you're giving back in a great way. Today, I wanted to welcome you to the show, sharing some of those advice and experiences that you've gained, and we're also going to talk about your book, Lead to Win, later on.
Okay.
So, maybe take us back to your roots in Port Arthur, Texas. I'm really curious because I'm from Houston. I know Port Arthur. I spent some time there. Really curious how that experience was.
Yeah, absolutely. I was born in Port Arthur, Texas, and my family stayed there till I was 8 going on 9. And I remember Texas vividly and loved being there, and very, modest means. My father was a captain of a commercial fishing vessel. My mother was a teacher, and specifically in physical ed, because she had been a track star in Texas. And, one of her mentors and the person she looked up to was also a coach and a physical education teacher, which is why she followed that path. And then my family moved from Port Arthur to Jacksonville, which is why you mostly hear me say Jacksonville is home, because from about 4th grade on, I was in Jacksonville, Florida. And again, same sort of lifestyle, same sort of lower middle class family, growing up primarily in a Black neighborhood, going to Catholic school, because I started Catholic school as a kindergartner in Port Arthur and finished 3rd grade there. So picked up 4th grade all the way through 12th grade in Jacksonville before then going on to Harvard.
Amazing. So talk to me about the first time you had your mindset to go into Harvard, or aiming for Harvard.
Yeah.
How was it in your class, in your high school class or your middle school class? Were the rest of the students also thinking like you, or
Yes.
did you say you were very different?
Yeah, I will tell you, Najib, that was the thing that actually motivated me to think about the Ivy League. I was not thinking about the Ivy League. I knew that I was going to go to college because I was always very strong academically. My parents always knew I would go to college, or they assumed I would go to college because I was always strong academically. And in the Black community, there is a very heavy emphasis placed on education as your way to ascend in the world. And my parents always assumed that I would get a scholarship because, again, I was strong academically. And I really wasn't thinking about the Ivy League schools at all. But I went to an excellent high school, Catholic high school. And in my junior and senior years, I was also taking honors classes at the time. And I kept hearing my classmates asking each other, Nobody was asking me, but they were asking each other, oh, have you filled out your application to Harvard? Oh, I'm working on my UPenn essay tonight. Oh, what are you thinking about Princeton? So that was one thing. The second thing was there were Ivy League recruiters that were coming to campus. And I started seeing some of my colleagues, sign up for those meetings. So I started signing up for those meetings and hearing about those colleges and, thought, I liked what I heard. And so I started figuring out that this Ivy League group of schools were something you needed to aspire to. Up until that point, my biggest aspiration was to go to UCLA simply because my favorite aunt lived in Los Angeles. That was my real motivation. Other than that, I was going to apply to Florida A&M, University of Florida, FSU, of course, because these were the Florida schools. And then the thing that actually pushed me over the edge is that I went to see the guidance counselor one day. By the time I had figured out that the Ivy League schools were supposedly this elite group of schools that were very difficult to get into, very competitive. And of course, I wanted to do that because it was supposedly hard and very competitive and not very many people get in. And I went to see him that day and he said, no, 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 don't worry about applying to the Ivy League schools. Just apply to the Florida schools. You'll go to a great school. And I said, well, why shouldn't I apply to those schools? And he said, well, because it's very hard. It's really difficult. They take 1 in 10 of the students. Trust me. Don't waste your time on that. Just apply to the Florida schools. And Najib, that I am negatively motivated. When you tell me I can't do something, I'm all over it. So the fact that he was suggesting that I might not get in made it really attractive at that point. Besides, I kept hearing my colleagues talk to each other about it. That also made it attractive for me to do. And so I applied. And I got into all of the Ivy League schools that I applied to, and I got into all the Florida schools. But by then, I had figured out that, Harvard was something that one did, that if you got into a Harvard. And when I got that acceptance letter, I said to my mom, I'm going to Harvard. And she said, oh my gosh, how are we going to pay for that? I said, I don't know, Mom, but I'm going.
You're going.
My dad was supportive as well. And I'm like, I don't care if I have to have 3 jobs on campus, I'm going. And I did have 3 jobs while I was on campus.
Wow.
As I've said many times to students, nothing is insurmountable. And if you really want to do it, you do it. And if I could graduate magna cum laude with all of those jobs, you could too, right? So go do it. And the other advice that I give to young people is never count yourself out. And for Pete's sake, don't let anybody else count you out. And I do to this day believe that guidance counselor had well-meaning intentions to direct me in a path that was going to get me success. But, at the end of the day, if I had accepted what he said, I would not have had the journey that I've had.
That's a great story. You mentioned, obviously, people know who you are. They know that you have an affinity towards singing gospel. And you talk about your experience going to these Catholic schools that you have and joining Baptist choirs. Can you tell us a little bit about that sort of affinity and that fascination that you had with singing?
Yes,
and what that meant to you? And it obviously means a lot to you. And we're going to talk more about it a little bit later.
Yes, I love singing. And it was a classmate of mine, Moses Miller, who actually gave me my push, if you will, to sing publicly. It was raining one day. And the teacher said, well, obviously we can't go outside. So for recess, we're going to have a talent show. And he kept kicking my desk and said, get up there and sing. You're always singing in my ear. This was 4th grade. He was like, you're always singing in my ear. Get up there and sing. So I did. And that was all she wrote. I haven't looked back since. And, it has been something that has always had a large place in my life. And I can't imagine that, that it wouldn't continue to occupy that space. And I sang all through high school in what I'll call organized singing, meaning in the school choir. And I also sang outside. And that's what started my love and passion for gospel music, because I was one of the few Catholics in my neighborhood. Most of my friends were Baptist or Pentecostal or Church in God in Christ. And I would go frequently to church with them. And then there were lots of other great singers, better than me, in my neighborhood. And we would sing, on the driveway, on the corner. And so once I started going to church with them, then they were in the junior choir, and the junior choir would often go outside of the church to minister either at other churches or in nursing homes. And so I started going with them. So I got into this rhythm in 8th grade of going to mass from 9:30 to 10:45, and then leaving mass and going to the Baptist church and being there from 11 to 2 on most Sundays. And I did that from 8th grade to the time I graduated. So by then I'd gotten a real passion for gospel music and still have that passion today.
Interest gas prices are devastating.
While the world fights uncertainty, Crow will help you embrace it. Embrace volatility. Crow.
And you carried on at Harvard. You had a band called
Yeah.
the Rhythm
The
Company.
Rhythm Company. That's right. Yeah, good homework. Yep. I had a band in undergrad, and then I had a band also at Harvard Business School called the Late Night Band. Some outstanding musicians that got together, and I was the lead singer for that band, and it was great because we were sort of the house band at Harvard Business School. Every time there was a major event, we were the band that was hired. So it wasn't a bad gig on top of being at business school. And I've continued to sing, and I'm in a couple of choirs as we speak.
Okay. So that's the Carla Harris, the singer.
Uh-huh.
Shall we switch gear to Carla Harris, the banker, and then maybe we'll come back and you can surprise us with some of your singing talents. Fingers
Well,
crossed.
I can connect the dots for you because I will tell you that Carla Harris, the banker, helped to evolve and develop Carla Harris, the singer. Because after I had recorded my first CD, and you could say the banker helped the singer because, I didn't know anything about recording a CD. I didn't know anything about what it would cost. So the banker obviously did finance the singer, but the banker's contacts, also introduced me to an executive producer on the project because one of my colleagues at Morgan Stanley introduced me to Ron Melrose, and Ron Melrose did sign on to be my producer for that first album. And he's the one that found the recording studio, arranged some of the music, had, the right kind of engineer on the project. I didn't even know I needed an engineer. But you see, the banker, at the connections and the network of the banker helped the singer. And then when it was time to commercially release my first album, I happened to say to one of my partners, Joe Perella at the time, and I said, Dick Parsons, and I need to get my record in the record stores. And he said, hey, I'll introduce you to Dick. And so one thing led to another. And next thing you know, I'm in what was then, Virgin Megastore or Coconuts or Sam Goody or Tower
Wow.
Records. I was at all of these distribution outlets. Obviously, they don't exist today because we stream music primarily now. But back then, it was a big deal to get distribution of your record. But the bankers' relationships got that done for the singer. And then when it was time to do my first concert, because I said, how do you sell records? You got to perform. So I did my first concert at Carnegie Hall in 2005, and it was a fundraising. And we gave every dime to two charities at the time. And it was the Carla the banker who knew how to do road shows and knew how to produce events that put together a team that was able to go into Carnegie Hall sort of self-contained and be able to produce this concert and sell the tickets and raise the money for the two charities. So the banker Carla the banker has been instrumental in Carla the singer being able to do what she has done besides just sing.
Great story. Great connections. We want to talk a little bit about your journey at Morgan Stanley. So right after business school at Harvard, you went to Morgan Stanley. Initially, you joined the M&A team. Again, I think somebody told you that would be a very difficult job. Carla, don't do it. And knowing you, negatively motivated, you said, that's what I want to do, right? So can you take us to the journey of starting at M&A and then how did you transition, and why did you transition to the capital markets group later on?
Yes, absolutely. So M&A was hot, hot, hot when I graduated in 1987. And of course, as you said, everyone said, don't do M&A. You won't have a life. Those people, they wear beepers. It's horrible. You won't be able to tell anybody that you can do anything. They need to see that you are focused just on M&A. So don't talk about the singing. Don't do this, blah, blah. Right. So, of course, I said, okay, that's where I'm going. So I went to M&A, and like I said, it was hot in 87, but by 89, that was the last big M&A year at that time. I mean, obviously we've surpassed that now, but that was the last big year. And as hot as it was in 87 and 1990, it was not. And in 1991, it was dead squared. So I thought that at that time, if I wanted to be long-term in this business, I needed to understand the bread and butter of capital raising. And I got an opportunity to go to capital markets. And so that's where I went, not really knowing what a capital markets banker did. And I will tell you that that was so fortuitous because I thought I loved M&A, but I loved capital markets even more. And the reason is, you know, when you're raising capital as a capital markets banker, your job is to create the illusion of scarcity. Your job is to make the market feel like this is a must-have property and they must have it now. And if they don't get it now, they'll never get it again at that price. And that's quite a challenge to create the illusion of scarcity when there is no scarcity. Because when you got to sell 10 million shares of stock, that's 10 million shares of stock. But to be able to help a company tell the story in such a compelling way that a buyer of that stock feels like they have to own it, that was always a great challenge that I relished every single time. Every single deal I enjoyed, even if it was a really hard deal. And I used to do a lot of our biotech deals, and there are certain periods where biotech is not in favor, and still trying to raise capital. And even those challenging deals did so much to add to my intellectual and my experiential tool chest. So that's how I got into capital markets, and you know, didn't look back. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And the bulk of my career was in capital markets, and I had the opportunity to work on some amazing deals, whether it was the Immunex common stock deal, which at that time was the largest common stock deal for a biotech company, or the IPO of UPS, which at that point was the largest IPO in U.S. history, or, you know, whether it was the Donna Karan IPO, or, I mean, there were just so many deals.
Martha Stewart.
Martha Stewart, that was a great deal because we did the Martha Stewart deal and the UPS deal in the same year. So it was just an amazing opportunity. But I will tell you that the thing that made me decide to do something different is by 2000, I'd say 5 or 4, I was doing a lot of public speaking, talking about the pearls that I ultimately wrote about in my first book, Expect to Win. And one of the pearls, it talks about the importance of taking risks. And I kept hearing myself say, if you consider yourself a leader in the 21st century, you must be comfortable taking risks. And I had to ask myself one day, and what risks are you taking? When you can execute 4 or 5 capital markets transactions in a week, you know, give speeches, do a, you know, Carnegie Hall concert, record CDs, and no CEO that you're working with on their deal even knows that you're doing anything else, maybe you have some capacity, right? You're doing this, you know how to do this. There's nothing that you're really adding to your intellectual or experiential tool chest. And Ajib, I always want to be the kind of person that walks my talk. So I started saying, you need to think about a different professional challenge. You need to do something that you had never done before. And I'd never had an entrepreneurial experience, and I didn't know very much about investment management at all. But I had been hearing people talk about emerging managers, which at that time, emerging managers was defined as women of color, women and or people of color who had their own asset management firms. Now, when people talk about emerging managers, they still mean that, but they also mean any fund that has $2 billion or less under management. If you are a long only fund, or a hedge fund that has less than $1 billion under management, you're considered emerging managers as well. But I thought, if I can create a fund that would invest in and allocate to women and minority asset managers, and it works, every firm will copy, and we will forever change the way these smaller funds are financed. And that's what put me on my journey. However, as you said earlier, when we were talking about timing, timing could not have been worse because I made this grand decision in the second quarter of '08, convinced the powers that be to let me go off and do that. Because it was a fund, it needed to be housed in investment management. And remember, I knew nothing about investment management. I knew nothing about the challenges of a first time fund with a first time team. And I
Right.
knew nothing about the fact that 2 months later, we were going to embark upon one of the biggest financial services crises that we had seen in history. Because I moved to investment management in July of '08. I don't need to tell you what happened September 13th of '08,
Oh yeah.
right? So, but it was an amazing experience because it was also evidence of me walking my talk. Because in that same speech where I talk about the pearl of taking the risk, I say, if you are faced with a risk and you're not sure whether or not you should do it, ask yourself three questions. Will this new thing give you skills and experiences that you wouldn't get if you stayed in your current seat another 12 months? Will this new thing expose you to people, relationships, and networks that you wouldn't get if you stayed in your current seat another 12 months? Third question, will this new thing now generate new branches on your personal decision tree of opportunity? I.e., you could go off and do some other things you wouldn't have been able to do if you stayed in your current seat another 12 months. If the answer to all three of those questions is yes, you should absolutely take that risk. Well, I did exactly that. Was this new thing going to give me skills and experiences that I wouldn't get if I stayed in my current seat for 12 months? Absolutely. I had never worked in investment management, didn't know how to talk to asset allocators, had to figure out a way to get them interested in what I had to say. And over that same 12-month period of time, there were no capital markets deals happening. So I would have added nothing to my intellectual or my experiential tool chest had I stayed in my seat for another 12 months. Second question, did I now get exposed to people, relationships, and networks? I now was meeting people and building relationships with people who had control over hundreds of billions of dollars as they sat on top of these large pension funds. People I had never dealt with in my career up until that time, who are now very well connected to the firm. And because we started having these conversations. And in some cases, we didn't have those relationships at a firm as a firm, and in some we did, and those were even strengthened. Third, did I now grow branches on my personal decision tree of opportunity? Here's a whole section of financial services where I could go in and not only be at the top and run it, but work on almost any part of that business. And I would not have been able to do that if I'd stayed in my capital market seat another 12 months. So, my paradigm of when you take risks were certainly applicable to that situation. And to this day, I am glad I took that risk, even though we were not successful in the end because of the financial services crisis and because of, first time fund, first time team, and the changes in things like the Volcker Rule and Dodd-Frank.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, the financial market cycles have been quite wild, especially 2008. Well, I mean, gosh, I had just gotten out of college at the time and I had all these big dreams of being on Wall Street, and all of a sudden there was no street for a while, right? So
That's right. It wasn't.
yeah. What would you say if somebody asked you what was your biggest accomplishment at Morgan Stanley? How would you sum that up?
It's like asking someone, what's their which one is their favorite child, right? So, I'll refrain from calling out any specific transaction, but what I will say was to make managing director was a big deal for me, a huge deal, because when I started in '87, I didn't start saying I'm going to build a career and I'm going to get to MD. That wasn't the aspiration. The aspiration was to go in and be successful and to make it to VP. But once I made it to and then I would figure it out. But once I made it to VP, by then the appetite to really be successful in this business was stoked, for sure. And so to finally get there, and to get there, frankly, with Carla Harris intact, I would say was my biggest accomplishment. Because up until then, and you probably saw a little bit of this in your time on Wall Street. There were a lot of people who were senior when I first started, but either on their second or third marriage, or generally weren't very happy people, or was sort of,
Right.
as I said, curmudgeons, or pretty grumpy. They're just, rich, but not necessarily liking life.
A lot of Gordon Gekko type characters.
Yeah, well, not even just that, just everyday regular people who were at the top of some of these firms. They had accomplished, they had gotten the title, but weren't necessarily somebody that you would define as well-rounded and
Right.
all the way happy all the way around. And I could look at myself in the mirror, Najib, when I finally got there and said, I like her. I like this woman. I'm happy with her. I know who she is. She's that person that you can rely on. She's that friend you can trust. So to get there and to really be proud of who I was and to like Carla Harris, I think was quite an accomplishment, because you didn't see a lot of that in the late 80s and early 90s on the street.
Yeah, as you're talking about your personal journey, I'm reflecting on what I read in your book, and you're already talking. It's like you're talking out of the book. Yeah.
Well, I wrote the book, but I'm not
you
trying
did.
to, because the
Trying to
book
make sure it was
reflects
you.
my truth.
So before we jump to the book, which would be the next question, you had this amazing opportunity to work under President Obama's National Business Council program. How did that come about? How were you selected? Are you friends with the Obamas?
No, I am not. I would like to be, for the record, but I am not on the short list of somebody who gets invited over to coffee. But hopefully, I will be one day. But I'll tell you, this is a great example of the power of relationships, because Karen Mills, who at the time was the SBA administrator, so she was, a confirmed cabinet member of the Obama administration. Karen and I are somebody who had had a relationship for a long time, because there's two women in finance. She was in private equity and VC in particular. I was at Morgan Stanley. We would often see each other at conferences. So we got to know each other over time. And one day, literally, she picked up the phone and called me. I could see it like it was yesterday. I was sitting in my office and she said, "Hey, how you doing?" And I said, "Karen, how are you doing? How are you enjoying what you're doing? Blah, blah, blah." And she said, "How would you like to work in this administration?" I said, "Oh, that would be amazing, but in what capacity?" So we started having conversations, and she said, "I think I got, the thing that you would love, because it represents a lot of what I've seen you do since you graduated from Harvard Business School. It is about women. It is about empowering women. It is about women who are executives because they're running their own thing. They're entrepreneurs. And I think you'd be great at this. And oh, by the way, it sort of sits under my office, because in case you didn't know, the National Women's Business Council has three customers, and it's the White House, the Congress, both the Senate and the House, and also the SBA. And your job is to sort of, the way I viewed it, was to keep your customers happy, find out what's important to them as it relates to women entrepreneurs in particular, and go forth and try to either influence policy or try to make a difference with respect to women entrepreneurs and how they interact in our ecosystem. So she was right. It was the perfect thing for me to sort of get an introduction, if you will, into what Washington engagement might look like. And I was very happy and still honored to get this presidential appointment, because now, if I were ever to go back to Washington to do anything, I have a better sense of how one conducts themselves in that ecosystem, which is very different than a corporate ecosystem. The biggest lesson that I learned was that your ability to get anything done is directly correlated with how many hands you shake.
Right.
Those relationships matter. If you think they matter on Wall Street, financial services, corporate America, they
Right.
really matter when it
Right.
comes to politics.
And yeah, we're going to visit that in your book. So now I'd like to introduce your book, Lead to Win,
Thank you.
which I had the pleasure of reading in my last vacation, and went travel with me several cities and through buses and planes. How to be a powerful, impactful, influential leader in any environment. What was the genesis behind this book?
Yes, the genesis was when we went into the shelter in place protocol in 2020, my phone began ringing off the hook. And I was hearing from CEOs across all industries. How do I lead in this moment? How do I motivate and inspire my people when we're not in the same place? How do I help people navigate the personal and the professional when it's all happening in, the personal context? How do we maintain, the journey that we've been on for diversity when people are not going to be together? All kinds of questions. And there were some observations that I took away from some of those conversations. First, many of those leaders had a measure of fear, because now all of a sudden, in order to engage with your people through this medium, there had to be a level of authenticity in a way that you don't necessarily, or you hadn't necessarily had to have when you were all in the same place. Because if you were building your career in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, there was a prescription of how you got to the top. And if you followed the prescription, you pretty much got to the top. And you never really would have had to bring your authentic self into that environment in order to do that. Now, it was being demanded by your core constituency, because your core constituency employees are largely now millennials and Zers. And they demand as table stakes transparency, inclusivity, and feedback. So it was a whole different dynamic. That was the thing that really made me go ahead and write the book. I had been talking about the need for a different type of leadership ever since the fourth quarter of 18. That was the first time I started talking about it, because that's when I realized that millennials and Zers were now the dominant population in the workforce, and that their demands were very different than those of us who were boomers and older Xers. And here was the other dilemma. Most people lead the way they were led. So if you were growing up, building your career in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, you had leaders that had the my way or the highway type leadership style. And that style was not going to work with this new constituency. So I said, I think I might have something to say here. So I thought, let me write this book so that it can hopefully be useful to people who are currently sitting in the leadership seat and those who are ascending to that seat, because we are forever changed as a workforce now. And in order to motivate people to give you their best work, you're going to have to show up in the way that I talk about in chapter 6 as an intentional leader.
Yeah, I do recall you talk about the traditional three constituents, shareholders, customers, and employees. And the new fourth constituent now is community. You mentioned the millennials, now the Gen Zs, with the advent of social media and the influence of it. The dynamic is completely changed. And you talk about, a lot of things you're talking about sounds like these psychology books that I've read, about mindfulness and loving yourself and knowing who you are, and all kind of correlates and coincides with the chapters. So I wish I could talk about all the chapters in your book, but I picked a few. One of them is knowing how you want to lead, right? And I guess that has to do with knowing yourself first and being authentic. Do you want to shed a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. And what I'm trying to say in that chapter is you have to be thoughtful about who you are showing up as now when you're the person that's the CEO, if you're driving the culture now. Because it's one thing to be an individual contributor. And notice I put that chapter right after the chapter that talks about the journey from being an individual contributor to being a leader. Because now some of the people who were your colleagues are now people that you're going to be leading. Some of the people who, you might have looked up to, or that you saw every now and then when you were invited to present to the board, these are now the people that will be evaluating you as a CEO. So my thought here is that you have to be thoughtful about how you want to show up. And you also have to understand the power that you have to curate every moment. Because when somebody is standing in front of you and you're the leader, they are consuming you.
Correct.
So be thoughtful about what you want them to consume and be intentional about that engagement, whether it is the lead director or whether it is the person that just started at your organization 2 days ago. You have an opportunity to influence that moment that will take you far beyond that moment. Don't blow it. Be intentional about it. So that's what I'm trying to say to people in that chapter.
Got it. Yeah. And you also talk about, you're always going to be judged. So make sure you understand how you're being judged. It's a little different kind of judgment that we usually talk about, like, don't judge me.
Yeah, but everybody will have a report card. You're wearing the CEO jersey, or you're wearing the founder jersey. Everybody's going to have a report card about you. And you should be intentional about helping them to shape that report card. Don't leave them to their own, devices to sort of figure out how they should be thinking about you. You want to say, I'm the person that's running this. You ought to hold me accountable for A, B, C,
Right.
D, and E. That's what
Right.
I'm going to give you. And I'm going to give you excellence around those 5 things. So now when they're thinking about you, they're going to start to think about you in the way that you have invited them to think about you, according to the report card that you have defined. But don't leave it. Define
Right.
it up front.
Right. Accountability, owning up to your leadership. The second chapter, or I think it's the third chapter, you talk about knowing how to assess talent. So as a leader, you have to build teams. You're a
Yes.
leader to many. You list a lot of really pertinent and interesting questions in the way you assess these future leaders and talent. Do you want to speak a little bit about your style?
Absolutely. And that was the one chapter, to be honest, that I was directing towards entrepreneurs, Najee, because here's what I figured out, especially given that I've had the privilege of working for the last 5 years with early stage companies. A lot of these entrepreneurs have a great idea. They have a great product. They can build a multi-billion-dollar company around that product. But that doesn't mean that they have the expertise or the experience around interviewing people. And here's the deal. If you're an early stage company, let's say you got a burn rate of $50,000, $75,000 a month, and you have a couple $1 million in the bank. If you hire somebody for $200,000 or $300,000, which is what a good CTO, a good CFO, a good COO, a good CSO may cost you, and you make a bad hire, it can be catastrophic to your ability to continue to be an ongoing concern, because that's a lot of money. So I tell people the first piece of advice is, if you haven't had a lot of experience interviewing, get yourself a kitchen cabinet of people who have had a lot of experience assessing talent, and then let them do most of the work and then give you the final 1 or 2 candidates. And now you're assessing fit, not necessarily capabilities or anything else. And if you don't have the luxury of even a kitchen cabinet, then that's why I gave you those 15 questions that you can ask. And I also tell you what you're looking for, and why you want to ask those questions. Because another mistake that I find that, early stage company CEOs make is that as the entrepreneur and the founder, you're the banker, you're the salesperson, you're the operations person. And your temptation when you're firing on all cylinders and things are going fast is to hire somebody like you. You say, I just need another me. If I can get somebody who has my hustle gene and that's willing to step in everywhere, I'll be good. But that's not what you need. You need somebody that can fill in the gap. And if you are better served by being the inside person, making sure that the company is running and the trains are getting there on time, then you need a good external person that can go out and sell. If you're in a situation where nobody can sell your company or your product the way you can, then you need a good COO, somebody who's going to make sure the company is doing what it needs to be doing, filing the regulatory approvals, making sure that they're building an HR system, making sure that payroll is happening when it should be happening. So you need somebody to fill in the gap. You don't need another you. But that's the mistake that I see entrepreneurs make over and over and over.
In another chapter, you talk about embracing and taking risks. I wanted to connect that with your experiences taking risks, especially what you earlier mentioned about going from the capital markets to investment management and trying to build this emerging fund. Can you share how you embraced those risks that you took and just the journey?
Absolutely. And, one of the things I say in Lead to Win is that great leaders take risks, and risks also enable you to grow. If you're staying narrowly within a safe zone, then you're not growing as fast as you could. Right. And so being willing to say, I have this information, but I don't have that. I know these things, but I don't know those things. But what I do know is if this works out, this can happen for us. Being able to develop a muscle of taking those calculated risks will accelerate your growth as a leader and will accelerate the growth of your company. And if you can get comfortable with that, and you get comfortable with your framework of taking risks, like I gave you mine, those 3 questions, then you'll be able to do that. And that's how you ought to think about it, because you will never, and you need to get comfortable with this fact, you will never have all of the information because you can't see into the future. And there'll be things that could happen on a day if you have the perfect strategy. There could be something exogenously that happens that completely now queers that strategy.
Absolutely. Time and time again, talk with leaders like yourself. There's this common denominator in these, essential things. Sometimes there are things that you cannot control. You can plan all you want, but like Mike Tyson said, until you get punched in your face, right?
That's exactly right. Mike Tyson also said hope is not a strategy, right?
Hope is not a strategy. Lead to win. You talk about partnerships, collaboration. Of course, I'm 40 now, so I've learned that I can't do it alone, right? You talk about a relationship currency, which I believe 3,000% is more important than just talent currency. Can you share some examples? You already have shared some in how others have helped you throughout your journey, but maybe some examples of the last couple of years, how collaborations and partnership have led you to achieve your goals that you wanted to achieve that you otherwise wouldn't have.
Absolutely. So I helped the firm raise a fund called the Next Level Fund, which is a fund that focuses also on women and people of color as entrepreneurs, but we are squarely looking for that Series A, B, C opportunity, because what my partner and I, Alice Vilma, figured out once we were working on the lab, because we created the lab together and grew the Multicultural Innovation Lab, is that there's another death valley. While there is a death valley, if you will, for women and people of color as entrepreneurs in that pre-seed, seed stage, even once they've gotten past proof of concept, there is clearly market acceptance and adoption of the product. And you need to now raise that Series A or Series B. It's hard to find those, as my friend at Hearst says all the time. You need patient growth capital. That's what you really need at that stage A, especially if you are a woman or a person of color. So we realized that was an opportunity to play and have an outsized, commercial opportunity and potential success. So we created the Next Level Fund along with Hearst and Walmart and Microsoft as the first investors in the first close. And we've now brought on a couple of other investors in that fund and about to have a second close. And what we learned about that is that, the power of relationships were front and center. We had relationships with all the people who were our partners, and we weren't trying to do a big fund. We really wanted to do something that felt more like a club deal so that we could have a very strong proof of concept to the market that when companies come together to not only write the check, but also to contribute their respective superpowers, you could really accelerate the growth of some of these early stage companies. And so far, so good.
Awesome. I know we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to ask you one other question from your book. Leading in times of crisis is one of your chapters. I'm sure you can use several examples, but I'm particularly interested in learning about the naked short trade that you talk about in your book. Where you want to talk about?
Oh, sure. I talk about that example a lot when people ask me, what's the biggest mistake you ever made? Right. And because there were so many lessons from that particular example. So just to quickly tell people, and I won't go into what a naked short is, but whenever you're doing a transaction, you, as an underwriter, you not only sell the amount of shares that's on the front of the prospectus, but you sell a little bit more of it just so you can have an opportunity to create the right kind of liquidity and support the stock in the aftermarket. The aftermarket is defined as, the next day after you've priced that transaction. Right. Well, I didn't understand the concept of a naked short. And just quickly, the only reason you would ever go naked is if your deal was not that healthy at the time of pricing. And the definition of a healthy deal back then was a deal that was sort of 6 to 7 times oversubscribed. But if you had a deal that was 2 times, 3 times oversubscribed, then it's not as healthy. And it was going to have some risk in the aftermarket that the price could go below where you priced that deal. Well, I didn't understand the concept of a naked. And the guy sitting next to me, and I was new in pricing deals, the guy sitting next to me had gone naked the day before. And I said, he went naked, I'll go naked. My deal was way oversubscribed. It was very healthy. And the last thing you do is go naked when your deal is in good shape. But I didn't understand that.
Right.
So the next day, the stock shot up. And the first thing you have to do is cover that naked short by buying stock in the market. But as an underwriter, you can never step in front of the customer. So you got to wait until you're like the last bid there, basically. And people were buying that stock left and right because the deal was way oversubscribed. They didn't get what they wanted in the allocation. They were buying that deal in the aftermarket, and that stock was steady going up. And the underwriter pays for that. So as you can imagine, it was quite expensive for the firm. And there was a senior manager director, once he found out that I had gone naked, he was like, "What? Why were we naked on that deal? That was crazy. Why would you do that? This is going to cost us a lot of money. This may kill the quarter. Why would she do that? What was she thinking?" And she was sitting right there as he was ranting and raving. Second
Right.
day he came in, I had not covered the short. I couldn't get in the market because so many people were buying it. He was making a big deal out of it. Third day I said, "Uh-oh, this can be a career limiting move." So the third day I took him into the conference room and I said, "Listen, I just wanted to talk to you because you've been making a big deal out of this for the last couple of days, and rightly so. I wanted you to know that I knew that I had made a big mistake and that I knew that I didn't understand what a naked short was. But I want you to know that I know what naked, fully clothed, half clothed, I know what all of that looks like right now. But I also want you to understand that when I make a mistake, it's the exception and not the rule. And I know you have my best interest at heart, so we don't have to talk about this anymore, right?" Right. And that was the last time he said anything about it. And here were the lessons. The lesson was, if you don't know something, ask someone. There is no shame in that game, especially in an industry where you can never fully know everything, right? Because things are so dynamic, it's changing. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is, if you make a mistake, own it. Don't hide. Don't slink under the desk. I should have been making a big deal on the trading floor, which is very public, about the fact that I made the mistake. "Oh, I didn't know what a naked short was. Oh, I know what it is now. Oh, y'all help me pray that the stock comes down. Come on down, stock. Come on down." I should have been making a big deal out of that. So everybody knows I own it, right? Because when you fail to own it, you give somebody else license to own your narrative. And you should never give anybody the opportunity to own your narrative. And the third thing is, if you see a bully, call him out. And because when you say, "I see you," then you take away all the power. So while it was a very expensive lesson for me, it was one that to this day I am glad happened, because I can use it as a way of helping other people as they make mistakes, because we all do.
Thank you so much for sharing all the great wisdom and experience and facts from your book. I'm so grateful. Quickly, just want to see if you have a line or two from your gospel experience you'd like to share with our audience today.
Okay, all right, Najib, you got me. You got me. I released on Spotify and other distribution outlets in December a song called "Everybody's Somebody's Child." And the reason I did that is because there seems to be so much consternation and fighting in the world that there is one thing that we all have in common: everybody's somebody's child. So I will sing the chorus from that song, okay? But you can get it on you can look at it on YouTube. It's a cool video, okay? "Precious as gold is each living soul, yet not one is perfect, we know. Wear my shoes for a mile, forgive with a smile. Remember, everybody's somebody's child. Yeah, everybody's somebody's child."
Wow. With that, thank you so much, Carla Harris. I will be in touch, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks for having me, Najib. Bye-bye.
Take a moment to please subscribe to the channel and like this video. We really appreciate your participation.